All right. Well, it's right at noon on the East Coast. So good afternoon, everybody on the East Coast, and good morning if you're like me and you're on the West Coast today. Brandon Garrett with the National Minority Equality Forum, and it's Friday at noon, so we're going to do our best to educate and I guess edutain you about some issues in the healthcare world, healthcare policy, and some of the work that we're doing and work that you might consider important that we want to make you aware of. Before I get into all that, I just want a couple of just regular announcements and then housekeeping announcements. One, as you know, April is Minority Health Month, and we host our National Annual Summit on Health Disparities in April. And this year, the theme is From Data to Action, and we're going to talk about our working community. So this is perfect segue for this today's webinar. So that's one, and led by our SHC team. And I will put a link in there for registration or for more information if you're interested. Two, housekeeping, and I don't know if it's in Jenny's remarks, but I'm going to take care of it. If you have questions that you want to ask of the panel, please put it in the Q&A box below. And if you just want to kind of keep the conversation going and putting some of your own ideas and things you want folks to be aware of, put in the chat feature. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Chinnie, who works on our team at NMQF. She helps lead one of the leaders in our SHC program, which really gets the word out and works in the community. And so I don't mess up any pronunciations or anything. I'll let Chinnie go ahead and introduce the webinar itself and the panel. So
Absolutely. Thank you
Chinnie, I'll
so
turn
much.
it over to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Brandon. Appreciate you. Good afternoon, everyone, and happy Friday. I hope you're having a good day where you are. We're excited that you're able to join us today as we talk about this very interesting topic. Today, we'll be talking about transthyretin amyloid cardiomyopathy, which is ATTR-CM for short. It's a rare disease and a form of heart failure. I recently learned about it, and I'm happy to be talking to experts in the field so that you all can learn some of the things that I've learned about. And with me to do justice to this topic today are an esteemed group of panelists. I'll be starting with Dr. Natasha Saraswat, who is an advanced heart failure and transplant cardiologist out of University of Chicago. Dr. Saraswat, you want to say hello?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here. I'm excited to talk to you about amyloidosis. This is a big part of my practice and something that's very near and dear to my heart.
Thank you, Dr. Saraswat. And of course, we have Dr. White, Dr. Janae White, who is a DNP-CRNP certified nurse practitioner out of Essential St. Agnes Heart Failure Center in Baltimore. Dr. White?
Thank you so much, Chinnie, and thank you everybody for being here today to listen to this topic. Yes, I'm very excited to present with this esteemed panel as well, and hope to share with you some information that you didn't know before.
Thank you, Dr. White. And of course, we'll be hearing from a caregiver. We have Ms. Velma Henderson, who is a retired chief nursing officer from Howard University Hospital. Hi, Ms. Velma.
Hello, good morning. Thank you so much. I thank you all for putting on this topic because it really is touching members of the underserved community in a way that we didn't even think about a few years ago. So I'm so excited to be here because my passion for heart disease and ATTR-CM specifically centers around my experience not only as a clinical nurse but a family experience. And I will have a chance this morning to share how this disease has impacted my family. So I thank you again for allowing me to be here.
Thank you, Ms. Velma. Yes, you will indeed have an opportunity to share with us. So that being said, our goal today is to educate, to share clinical expertise, as well as address patient caregiver concerns, and make sure that you leave here empowered to advocate for research in ATTR-CM and the right treatment for ATTR-CM. So let's get into it. Dr. White, can you explain to us briefly what ATTR-CM, so what is it and why is it so very often undiagnosed?
Sure, great question. So I guess kind of a simplistic way of explaining it is misfolded proteins get deposited in different areas of the body and then cause problems there. So let's talk about it in a little bit more detail. So there's a transthyretin protein that really kind of combines together, looking like a four-leaf clover is kind of the best way to describe it. It transports a thyroid hormone, thyroxine, as well as retinol, vitamin A throughout the body when it's working appropriately. What can occur, though, in transthyretin cardiac amyloidosis is that this four-leaf clover protein structure breaks apart, and then those broken pieces misfold and clump together with other broken pieces, and then get deposited in different areas of the body, which can cause a whole slew of different symptoms depending on where they get deposited. When we're talking about cardiomyopathy or related to the heart muscle, we're specifically talking about those deposits of that transthyretin protein in the heart muscle. Can get deposited, though, in many other areas of the body: nerves, gastrointestinal system, the stomach or intestinal system, as well as the kidneys, and based on where it's deposited, cause different symptoms, which we'll go into more detail later. Because of how it affects so many different parts of the body, it can often be missed, and we don't put together all of the different symptoms as this being the primary cause. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as well.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. White. Dr. Saraswat, from what we've shared in some of the other trainings that you've provided, we've talked about having a wild type, having and the hereditary type. Can you speak a little bit about both of them and what the key differences are between the wild type ATTR-CM and the hereditary ATTR-CM?
Yeah, sure. So the pathophysiology is very similar in that, it's the same issue with this four-leaf clover. The wild type tends to be a process of aging. We don't really understand why it happens and why that protein becomes unstable, but tends to occur more in men than women. We don't really understand why. And is very much more common in the Caucasian population than anybody else, though I think it's certainly underdiagnosed throughout the world. The wild type tends to cause more heart problems, can cause some carpal tunnel syndrome when the protein deposits in the wrist, and spinal stenosis, where it actually layers all along the spinal cord and causes the nerves to be pinched, causing numbness and tingling in the legs and the hands. But those are the main things we see with wild type. The hereditary form is actually caused by a variant in the DNA, right? The building block that make us who we are. When that DNA makes the protein forms abnormally and then leads to amyloid, and can be much more systemic than the wild type can, and that it tends to cause more nerve problems, what we call autonomic dysfunction, which causes sweating problems, urinary retention, diarrhea, things like that, more than the wild type can. But honestly, they're just different types of the same disease. With the hereditary type, the way we can differentiate is with a genetic test that actually looks for one of those gene variants. We know of over 200 different kind of gene variants in the population, and the most common in the United States is what's called the valine isoleucine mutation, which is in about 4% of African Americans, which is 1 in 25 people that actually get that gene variant. Now, not everybody who gets the gene variant gets the disease, but very important to know if you have the variant, and that certainly predisposes you to the heart problems and the nerve problems if you were to have a gene variant.
Okay, so talk to us about detection. How, I know you talked about the hereditary and wild, but why would you say that early detection is critical for ATTR-CM?
Okay, good question. So what we know is that the earlier we treat this disease, the better. And understanding kind of the timeline, especially with the hereditary, the V122I amyloidosis, is really important, because what tends to happen before we see any heart manifestations are the nerve problems, the carpal tunnel, the spinal stenosis. And if we can pick that up 5 years or 10 years before we see any heart problems and start acting on it and recognizing signs and symptoms, then we can treat earlier. And the earlier we detect and treat, the longer you live, the better your quality of life is. So really important that we pick this up early. And that's why we're here today.
Absolutely, absolutely. Dr. White, please talk to us about the common symptoms of ATTR-CM that patients and healthcare providers are to be aware of. I know when you talked about what it is, you talked about how it's manifested in different ways, but what are some common symptoms that patients and also healthcare providers can be on the lookout for with regards to this disease?
Sure, sure. And I think that Dr. Sarswat as well did a pretty good job sort of introducing us to some of those symptoms that our patients may come to us with, or individuals that may experience. I think kind of going from head to toe here, dizziness, lightheadedness, something called orthostatic hypotension or dizziness when standing up, or lightheadedness, a drop in blood pressure when standing up, patients may experience. As well, they may have different heart palpitations, feeling like the heart's racing or flip flopping because of irregular heart rhythms. They may have shortness of breath. So they notice that they were able to climb a flight of stairs a month ago, but now they're having to stop halfway through to catch their breath when climbing this flight of stairs. Individuals may have that carpal tunnel syndrome, so the numbness and tingling in the hands and fingers that Dr. Sarswat had mentioned earlier, as well as we can see that spinal stenosis or numbness and tingling, causing numbness and tingling down the legs, or peripheral neuropathy, numbness and tingling in the feet as well. Interestingly, patients can have some different stomach issues like constipation, diarrhea, alternating back and forth. And they can have some leg swelling as well. This is by no means a full list of symptoms, but these are kind of some common symptoms that patients present with. And you can see how, like, as a clinician, particularly if you have somebody with a heart failure with preserved ejection fraction or a stiff heart diagnosis, as well as somebody with like type 2 diabetes, a diagnosis there as well, how some of these may be missed and just thought to be due to other conditions or separate conditions versus all being related to one condition, transthyretin cardiac amyloidosis. The other thing is as well, we have a lot of specialists in our healthcare system, which is important, but also people can be having their constipation treated by a GI specialist, their kidney dysfunction treated by a kidney specialist, their heart treated by a heart specialist. And if one of these providers is not putting together all of these symptoms, it's easy to miss things in that regard as well. But again, we're spreading awareness. We're hosting webinars like this, so then we can learn, grow, and do better, so we can identify this multi-systemic condition.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. White. Dr. Sarswat, please talk to us about I'm sorry about that. Talk to us about latest advancements in testing when it comes to this disease.
Yeah, sure. So this is part of what has really changed the field in the last 10 years or so. Prior to like 2016, to really understand if there was heart involvement, we would actually have to do a heart biopsy, which I know sounds, scary, and though we do them frequently. Around 2016, a new imaging test was developed called a PYP study, which is a nuclear medicine study, which basically allows us to see amyloid deposition in the heart non-invasively. So as long as we rule out other kinds of amyloid, we can just do a test, an imaging test, and that allows us to pick this up by seeing if there's protein deposition, and that's often enough to treat and determine if somebody has the disease, which is great, and really has led to all of us realizing that this disease is much more common than was initially thought, and I think has really helped, along with the fact that now we have wonderful treatments.
Thank you. So just because you said, talked about how common this disease is, we're going to allow that we answer the question that's in the chat that says, what percentage of African Americans actually are faced or at risk for this disease?
Yes. So again, that variant that we talked about in the DNA is in about 4% of African Americans. Now the question becomes the penetrance, meaning if you have the gene variant, what are the chances you get the disease? And this is something where we're still learning, right? And I think that's a big part of this is a disease that 10 or 15 years ago we knew very, very little about, and we have really learned a lot recently. We think the penetrance of the V122I mutation is probably around 30%. We don't know. A few years ago, I would have said 60%. And now that we're doing much more genetic testing and really understanding, I think it's probably around 30%, which means that say you have your father has the variant, right? Each child would have a 50% chance of getting that gene variant because it's what's called autosomal dominant. Then if you have the gene variant, the chances that you will actually get the disease are probably around 30%.
Okay,
And
thank
I
you.
think, and I think,
Mhm.
sorry to interrupt, Chinnie, but
Mhm.
I think this is a really interesting question for me in particular, because it's really what made me start to become really interested in transthyretin cardiac amyloidosis as I
Okay.
was doing community work, community education, and learning more about this. And its impact in the African American community as well. This is where my interest even started to grow further. So I think that this, again, this awareness is so important. And a lot of times as well, we can see within the African American Black communities that there are multiple comorbidities. So
Mhm.
individuals oftentimes have kidney disease, type 2 diabetes. And so, again, it can kind of complicate figuring out the picture or clarifying the picture. So it's so important, this awareness, and then the tests that we now have to help us accurately diagnose.
Absolutely. Thank you for saying that, Dr. White. So let's put this into context now. We've talked about the disease, we've talked about the treatment, the advancement, and all of that. Let's hear from you, Ms. Velma. You know, you have siblings who were diagnosed with ATTR-CM. Tell us what it's been like, going from wondering what this was to actually getting the diagnosis, and what the biggest challenge has been for you as a caregiver, in navigating this whole journey from diagnosis to treatment.
Thank you. It was in October 2018 when my family's lives changed forever. That was when my younger brother, who had suffered for years, this was a 6'5" athlete who played pro basketball, and all of a sudden he started to get these symptoms that no one could explain. Started with we talked about the peripheral neuropathy, pain in the joints, legs, carpal tunnel. And he was told, well, you're spending too much time on the computer, which he really didn't believe. And then it led also to atrial fibrillation, kidney failure. And all this time, no one knew what was happening. So it was very frustrating. So the very first hardship was just getting a diagnosis. No one during this time thought about ATTR-CM or amyloidosis. So eventually he went into heart failure, and he was about 64 at the time. And first they diagnosed him with pneumonia, and he said, I don't have pneumonia. He said, I don't have pneumonia. Eventually said, well, it is heart failure. We don't know what it is. So he was actually diagnosed via biopsy. And they really weren't even doing biopsies around locally. It was sent to biopsy of his heart, which was sent to the Mayo Clinic in Minneapolis. And it came back with the diagnosis of HATTR-CM, cardiac failure caused by amyloidosis. And the other shocking thing was, now I have to go back a little bit. I was a caregiver. I was a professional nurse who spent most of my time in the intensive care unit, where I took care of patients with. That was my first love for trying to understand about heart disease. Again, taking care of patients who were in heart failure, who had heart attacks, and not once did I ever see anything anywhere about cardiac amyloidosis. So the first time that really hit me was when my brother was diagnosed, and when they sent us this alert to say that because this is hereditary, all the siblings should be tested to see if in fact they're carrying this defective gene. And so as the person in healthcare, then it became my job convince my family members this is the thing to do. And that wasn't easy. I had some who said, well, I'd rather not know. And the others who basically said, oh, I don't really believe him. I don't really trust it. So we did end up getting most of them tested. And at that time, there were 7 of us alive. And out of the 5 agreed to be tested. And out of that 5, 3, in fact, were carrying the gene. Well, my sisters had both been ill. They were younger also. They were in their early 60s. And both of them had had a stroke. They both were in a fib. This is the irregular heart rhythm. And one sister had just awful nerve pain, just polyneuropathy, just miserable. And they had been given different diagnoses. No one had ever thought of amyloidosis. Well, they were tested and went on to have the sophisticated PYP test, which confirmed they not only were carrying a gene, because the clinicians have just told you that, in fact, You can have the defective gene and not have the disease, but they actually had the disease and was late stage at that time for both of them. But my brother was diagnosed in October 2018. He only lived about 4 weeks after the diagnosis.
Oh no.
And then my second sister, now this sister who had had a stroke and had all these symptoms, was actually seeing a cardiologist, which is one of the reasons when we talk about advocacy, it's so important. She was actually seeing a cardiologist. When I sent her the information and said, please have him test you for this, her cardiologist said to her, you don't have anything like that. Oh, you don't have that. He would not test her. So we did get her to an advanced cardiac center, and they did test her. And she, in fact, also had late stage heart failure due to amyloidosis. And she lived less than a year after she was diagnosed. Now, I heard we talked a little bit about the benefits of early detection. Now, one of the benefits, because my brother said as he was dying, well, if it helps everyone else, it would be worth it. He said, I want you to make sure that they get tested. So one of my younger sisters, who was detected early, she also actually had heart failure at that time also and had a stroke, but she was diagnosed at the time there was treatment available. My brother, who died in 2018, there was no treatment available at that time specifically for the disease. You can always treat the symptoms, which is early detection is important because there's always something that can make the symptoms better, usually, even if it does not cure the disease. So that sister benefited from therapy and actually had some pretty good quality to her life before she died. She was able to do things, participate in family events, and and enjoy some of that because there was treatment which did slow the development of her disease. So this is a challenging disease, which is why forums like this are so important because I had not heard anything about it as a clinician. And yet now people will ask me questions, well, I saw that disease you were talking about because there are commercials on television and there are forums like this. It's really important. So it's still a challenge though. It's not easy for a person living with this condition. We still have primary care practitioners who don't understand it and who you basically will have to beg for a test. And sometimes you actually have to leave and go somewhere else because they don't understand it. So they're not receptive. So there's still challenges. There are challenges also when it comes to treatment. Now, anytime you come up with new treatments, it's extremely expensive. Really, with advocating and pushing, my sister was able to get the treatment as a considered a hardship patient because most people cannot afford the cost of this therapy. And even when we say we need to get tested, well, the first step is genetic testing. Now, most of the time, there are programs that will pay for the genetic testing, but most of the major heart centers, and I think the clinicians can talk about what happens at their center. If you have someone, drug company or whatever, who says, well, we'll sponsor the genetic test, most of the time you're required to have other things, for instance, an echocardiogram. And if you don't have insurance, then they won't do the test because if you don't have insurance to do the follow-up, then you're not out. So there's still challenges there. Now, there was some talk about the frequency of this and your chances of getting it. Now, my brother had one son. That son carries the gene. He has a defective gene. My sister had two children. They both carry the defective gene. So you see how it continues through generations. So it's important to have that early testing. Now, my nephew who has a defective gene, he's not been able to get any follow-up because the blocker again was, we won't give you the follow-up because you need to be able to come in. There are periods when you need to get that echocardiogram, you need insurance to do that. So there's still challenges as it relates to being diagnosed and even having access to the treatment that is available.
Thank you so much, Ms. Velma. We're very sorry for your losses, and we really applaud you for being brave enough to be here to tell that story, to make sure that we're continuing to continue to help the people that we serve in our communities. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. So just following that up, what would you say are some lifestyle changes or supportive care strategies that would be helpful to improve the quality of life of people who live with ATTR-CM?
well, everyone would probably say the same thing. It's important to maintain your health. It's important to have a treatment team that you trust who are working with you and to be able to work with that. And as a family member, we need to be involved because often these patients end up getting very sick and they need a lot of support. They need someone to take them to their appointments and to help them with their diet because sometimes they really don't even feel like eating because it was discussed in terms of one of the symptoms of this is how it affects the GI system. They tend to lose weight, they might have diarrhea, whatever. So just helping them fix something that they will eat and assisting them with that and helping them to eat healthy and encourage them to stay as active as possible for as long as they can. And certainly if we have some habits like smoking or whatever, we definitely need to get rid of those kind of bad habits that are bad for us anyway. That certainly
Absolutely.
make things worse when we're dealing with something like this
Thank you.
disease.
Sure. Thank you so much. Dr. White, talk to us about misconceptions about ATTR-CM. What are some myths that you have encountered in talking to people, whether patients, caregivers, or just people generally? What are some misconceptions and myths that you've seen?
Sure, sure. And I honestly think a lot of these are rooted in how much we've learned about cardiac amyloidosis over the past several years. But I think some of the things that I encounter is that it's thought of as almost a death sentence, which we know now with our early sort of diagnostic testing to be able to accurately diagnose earlier and start the treatments that we have. And we'll talk a little bit more about all of the research that's being done and all of the other treatments that are to come. But people can go on to live long and good quality lives, So I think that one of those myths is there's nothing that can be done. And so, and then another myth that I hear often is that it's so rare. Why are we testing for it? Or it's so rare. This person is likely not to have it. Most their neuropathy, let's chalk that up to uncontrolled diabetes, or they just have heart failure with a preserved ejection fraction, and maybe no need to look or dig further. But as we're learning, particularly again with these diagnostic tests, it's not that rare. We're finding it more and more, and we're being able to really help patients. I would say those are two of the primary myths. And then, yes, the medications are expensive and there's some challenges with access, but I think that's the importance of a multidisciplinary team. There are ways that we can work to get patients the medications and treatments that will be helpful for them. So I don't think that alone should be a reason not to pursue further investigation, diagnosis, and then treatment. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you for saying that. Dr. White, I'm sorry, Dr. Saraswat, can you tell us what patients and maybe family members should do if they suspect, based on the symptoms that we've listed today, ATTR-CM? What should they do? What's the next step?
Yeah, I mean, the next step certainly is engaging with your physician, whether it's a primary care physician or if you have a cardiologist or neurologist, and just saying, hey, I heard about this. Is this a possibility? And, with the way the medical community has gone, there's a reasonable chance that the provider won't know that much about it, right? And that's okay. They just have to know how to seek help, right? And if you're not getting the answers that you want, to go somewhere else where that people understand the disease, and that's okay. I think somebody wrote in the chat or on the Q&A about often misdiagnosis and people kind of being pushed away, which is unfortunate, but it is a reality. And I think that's part of why we're here, not just going to other physicians to teach them, but teaching the community, because you can advocate for yourself and say, hey, no, there's something that you don't know that I want to make sure that I don't have. And let me seek out the best opinion that I can have and go to where people really understand this disease. And it's getting better in the medical community, but boy, we still have a long ways to go. If you're looking for answers and nobody is giving you what you want, certainly we have wonderful patient advocacy groups as well, things like the Amyloidosis Support Group, and reaching out through there. Lots of times I've been connected with patients that way from all over the country. that you call, you get online even and send an email to the amyloid support group, and they connect you with a provider locally who really understands the disease and can help.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very helpful. How about you, Dr. White? What would you say is a way to improve awareness, especially among healthcare providers and maybe even the general public? What are some pointers you have for improving awareness?
Sure. So, as far as awareness among healthcare providers, medicine is always changing. So, we're really having to kind of always be learning and looking up information, following up on research studies. So, I think that there's a lot of work that an individual healthcare provider has to do to really educate themselves. I think that through certain professional organizations as well, they offer different seminars and educational webinars, similar to what we're doing here, but more so focused specifically towards healthcare providers, where they can gain some additional information as well. But really, really, you do have to kind of seek those out. And spend time sort of learning. At certain hospital institutions, they have grand rounds, and that's another place where information is disseminated. So healthcare providers can gain more information that way as well. And then as far as the general public, so of course there's the advertising that you see a little bit more so now, and probably will continue to see more of. And then there's the events like this where we're able to reach out directly to community members and talk about the disease process, which I think is really helpful. That's a lot of the work that I do in the community, is really kind of touching individual groups of community members and talking about it in a setting where they can ask questions and we can have some discussion. I think that's really helpful. And what I hear from those events is somebody left that event and then they're talking with their aunt, and their aunt is describing all these symptoms that their aunt has been experiencing. And they say, hey, I heard a presentation a couple of weeks ago, a couple of months ago, and they were talking about this condition. Let me Google it. Let me pull it back up. And hey, this sounds like you might need to talk to your healthcare provider about this. So I hear a lot of those stories coming back to me, or even patients coming to me saying, hey, I heard about this on the radio. Can we talk a little bit more about it? So
Absolutely. That's fantastic. Thank you.
welcome.
Dr. Saraswat, she spoke about research studies. Can you talk to us about any exciting research developments or clinical trials in ATTR-CM that we should be aware of?
Yeah, sure. So this is there's a lot that's changing, and truthfully, this is how we advance medicine and learn, right? So the first drug, I guess we haven't really talked too much about treatment. The first drug that was FDA approved about 6 years ago was based on, a clinical trial where we're looking at patients that have amyloidosis, and we initially had approved what's called a stabilizer that kind of keeps that protein in the four-leaf clover. A second drug just got FDA approved called acoramidis in November, based on clinical trials that we've done over the last few years. And those drugs, again, make you live longer, feel better, stay out of the hospital. Then we have a second class of drugs, which were called silencers. Silencers basically prevent your body from making a lot of the protein, about 80% of them. And there are 4 of them that have been FDA approved for the hereditary form with a neuropathy, and one that just got FDA approved last night, called vutrisiran, that was approved for cardiomyopathy as well. And we've learned all of this just through clinical trials. I will say one of the biggest issues in all of these trials is that the African American community is so underrepresented. And truthfully, even just hereditary patients are underrepresented in all of these things. And it's so important that as we learn and study these drugs and try to make sure that they're beneficial, that it's applicable, right? So if there are not a lot of African Americans or not a lot of hereditary patients that are in those clinical trials, how do we say it's going to work for everybody? It's hard when there's only, like 10 people out of 1,000, and then we're going to say, well, we'll give this drug to you based on a bunch of, 80-year-old Caucasian men that were studied. And everybody's bodies are different. The way we metabolize drugs, women versus men, the majority of the patients in these trials are also men, very few women. So I would advocate, just to say that clinical trials are not being a guinea pig. They're not ways that we're experimenting on people. This is how we advance science. This is how we understand the right dose. And truthfully, how efficacious all these drugs are, and being involved in them is very important. the upcoming clinical trials, we have 3 trials that are actually going to change the way the whole amyloidosis field. So all of the drugs we've talked about so far basically prevent progression, right? So that the disease does not get worse. We have 3 clinical trials that cause reversal. These are medications that basically eat up the amyloid in the body and cause the disease to regress, which is amazing. Again, these are phase 3 clinical trials at this point, so they've been studied in small groups of people, and already been studied in animals. We've already honed down the doses. We're just trying to figure out, well, is this dose a little bit better than this dose without the side effects, right? And these are international trials studied in big groups of people. But again, getting involved in them and understanding, are they applicable to every community is super important. So again, 3 of those trials. And then we also have a clinical trial with gene editing. So this sounds like it's pretty far out there, and I thought this was a long ways away, but it's here. It's what's called CRISPR gene editing. And basically it's a one-time infusion that changes your DNA, so your body really doesn't make the protein. And that is an ongoing phase 3 clinical trial that we have called Magnitude as well. So a lot of really good stuff coming down the pipeline, a lot of exciting stuff. And I would encourage anybody who is involved with this disease to really be involved, because that's how we change things. And clinical trials are an opportunity for you to get the latest and greatest at the earliest without waiting, for things to become too late too. There are opportunities, truthfully.
Absolutely. Sounds like a lot of hope. Thank you, Dr. Saraswat. Thank you.
And Chinnie, do you think I could add just a couple of things to that?
Absolutely, please.
So if somebody, and that was great. I absolutely agree with everything Dr. Saraswat said. If somebody does not have access to an amyloidosis center, they can also go online, like clinicaltrials.gov is a good way to learn about different clinical trials. And then even as Dr. Saraswat had mentioned earlier, some of these amyloid support groups can give you a lot of information as well on how to get involved with clinical trials. So you as well can participate. The medical community has done unethical things with the Black community in the past in regard to research and clinical trials, and we recognize that, and we've learned from and grown from that. So now when you participate in clinical trials, everybody has to everybody has to have access to standard of care. So they're not going to not give you a certain treatment that we know would be helpful. So just like Dr. Saraswat said, you have an opportunity to gain gain access to new treatments and beneficial treatments, but know that you won't be it's not like you're not going to have access to what we already know would be helpful. That would be unethical, and we wouldn't do that in research today.
Thank you very much.
And one of the things that we can do, and I have to plead guilty because I was almost an old person before I agreed to participate in the clinical trial. And not really because I was distrusted, it was just I kind of thought, well, someone else will do it. And now, it's someone else can't do it. We need people who look like me to participate. So one of the things that, and because nurses are so well trusted, one of the things that the National Black Nurses Association is doing is trying to encourage more people of color to participate in clinical research, because people tend to be more trustful when people look like them, and they kind of say, well, they're not going to try to get me into anything that will be harmful for me. So I do think that I think we're seeing an increase, but we certainly need to see more of an increase. And that's where advocacy groups like the National Black Nurses Association, and there are others, some of the sororities are doing the same thing, because we do recognize that we don't know if it's good for us unless we are involved in the clinical trials. And having a family history that I have, I'm so excited about the clinical trials, especially when we talk about the hereditary nature of this ATTR-CM, and the fact that my nieces and nephew perhaps can have a different outcome because of the exciting things that are going on in clinical trials. So it's something that I will continue to advocate for and encourage others to do also.
Okay,
Absolutely.
great.
You want a seat at the table.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say, there was one clinical trial that I didn't mention that I should have. Acoramidis, which is one of those stabilizers that we were talking about, we're actually studying prevention. So for people that have the gene variant but do not have the disease, they will get the drug and we'll follow them for years and try to see if we can prevent the disease from ever manifesting. So that is again, a great opportunity for the drug that's can be expensive but has no side effects. To be able to take this and hope that you never ever actually get the disease is a wonderful thing.
Yes,
That's
And,
another
and
good opportunity.
And Dr. Sarswat, would you say in your experience with clinical trials that also individuals have access to scheduled echocardiograms or additional testing along the way, even if they didn't have insurance?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think we can come back to that question on the genetic testing, right? I mean, through all of these clinical trials, again, everything is free. All of your testing, all of your genetic testing, the echoes, all of it comes with it, even transportation. So if you live in an area that does not offer a clinical trial, or it's, you know, an hour away and you're like, oh, how am I going to drive back and forth or take a bus back and forth? Generally, they'll contract with like a transportation company that will get you back and forth and wait there for you while you see the physician and do everything. So it's all free, which is a nice way. Also for genetic testing, back to the idea that some of the pharmaceutical companies are sponsoring things through genetic testing companies. I haven't seen that you've had to have insurance. I mean, I think certainly for follow-up care, that's helpful. But I'll test people that don't have insurance, right? A lot of the companies will basically go online, and as long as I do pre-test counseling where I'm telling the family member about what to expect and risks and benefits of genetic counseling, will send you a kit in the mail. You literally spit in a cup, and it takes DNA from your cheek cells, and then I'll get results in a few weeks and follow up. Now, then certainly if you have an abnormality in the DNA and we need to do further testing, that's where the insurance really plays in. And that can be challenging, though there are, again, centers all around the country that will help take care of patients without insurance as well. And again, you don't have to have insurance to be part of the trials either.
Great, great. Very helpful, very helpful. Dr. White, would you say that there are other treatment approaches that would you say that the treatment approach would be different for someone with a hereditary versus someone with a wild type ATTR-CM, or is it the same?
So I think Dr. Sarswat did a good job of touching on this a little bit earlier, kind of depending on the treatment, how it was studied and how it works. It will specifically be for patients with hereditary type of ATTR-CM or both hereditary variant or wild type of ATTR-CM. So it does vary and it does make differences. I think that a good example is some of the medications that we use for those with polyneuropathy and hereditary ATTR. You can see that that's kind of just for hereditary. And then there are treatments that we can use for both individuals, particularly when talking about stabilizers. Yeah.
Okay.
So it does vary.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's helpful. How about the approaches and supportive treatments? Are there other things that folks can do beyond just therapy or medications to help people living with ATTR-CM? Is that something that's currently offered, or is that something that we're still exploring, Dr. Sarswat?
So non-medical, like avoiding pills and things like that. Certainly, there is some data with green tea extract. It's honestly kind of small amount of data that can help with amyloid. And then in terms of other supportive therapy, I mean, physical therapy I think is wonderful. Cardiac rehab can really help. And then even from the polyneuropathy side, physical therapy can help. And there is some data for acupuncture being beneficial in that population as well. But yeah, a lot of the medications that have been shown to make people live longer are pharmaceuticals at this point.
Okay, thank you. Dr. White, do you have anything to add?
I think that covered it pretty well. I think that from a psychological standpoint, individuals probably experience improvements with participating in like amyloidosis support groups. But I would be interested to see what the research shows on that. But I would imagine that can be another helpful adjunct.
Okay, sounds good. Ms. Velma, what role would you say? We've talked about patient support groups. We've talked about um, advocating for this disease, but what role would you say the patient advocacy groups play in supporting? Why is it important for someone who maybe is a caregiver or who's living with this disease? Why is it important? What role would you say the patient advocacy group plays in that person's journey?
Well, certainly in terms of increasing awareness, making sure that the word is out and trying to, the group should stay abreast of what the newest things are so that when people present with this hopelessness, there's no reason why I should do that. Why should I be involved in clinical trials? So we can actually have some facts that we can give to folks who have this disease. And also, in terms of how we can help again with all the things that need to be done. Where we have, if there's an advocacy group, someone needs to be driven to a primary care appointment, and maybe we could have some volunteers set up who would do that. Maybe some of these grandparents who are taking care of grandchildren, and they can need something as simple as someone to stay with their grandchildren while they are going for treatment, or assistance with getting grandchildren off to school, assistance with just everyday things like managing a household, just housework, and someone to bring over a meal, and certainly to encourage folks to participate in the support groups. Because I don't know, it might not be any data that support this, but certainly the people that I talk to who are involved in support groups do really get support from those groups. It really does help in terms of, because there's a lot of psychological issues associated with this kind of scary disease that no one seems to really know a lot about, and it's a scary disease. Plus, you not only are you frightened for yourself, but for siblings and children. So I think advocacy groups and the caregivers play a really big role in terms of helping to make this a disease. While it's challenging, it can be managed with the proper support, and the caregivers and advocacy groups can help to provide that support.
Absolutely. Thank you. So it's what I'm hearing you say is that advocacy groups are very great resources for patients and
Yeah,
caregivers, and that it's
absolutely.
important for patients and caregivers to find these groups and belong to. That
Yes.
being said, Dr. Sarso and Dr. White, I'm sorry I didn't say this earlier. Would it be possible for you to put things in the chat, like those groups in the chat, so that folks can have that? And we will add it as part of our resources when we do send out this the the recording for this video. So just if you can put any groups that you think will be helpful for caregivers and patients in the chat, that will be very helpful. Thank you very much. All right, moving on. What resources, Dr. Saraswat and Dr. White, you can take this, whoever wants to go first, it's okay. What resources would you say are available for newly diagnosed patients and their families to help them learn? Because listening to this, it could be overwhelming, right? Where do I even start? So what resources do you see will be a good place to start to learn what to do, whether it's someone who's recently diagnosed or someone who might be on their journey to diagnosis, but where do you suggest that a person starts with learning or becoming more familiar with what the resources, the education, the awareness, the advocacy pieces of advocacy piece of this disease? Where would you suggest someone starts?
I would say, the amyloidosis support group, I think, is wonderful. I'll say when I have patients that are newly diagnosed, we also have like a prepared packet that we give every patient that has a lot of the educational things, and actually a booklet that's made by the amyloidosis support group, because we're talking through it and I think it can get very overwhelming for patients. The support group's booklet, I think, is great in that it is aimed at the non-medical person and kind of breaks it down really nicely in the comfort of your own home, that you can flip through and read about it without having to be in a like a clinic situation. I think that's a great resource. There are, I think, looks like both Janae and I wrote the same, the Amyloidosis Research Consortium, the Amyloidosis Support Group. There is the Amyloidosis One Voice also does a weekly webinar that I really like, that is aimed at kind of not, you know, the support for caregivers and everything else, and not just like clinical trials and medications, but you know, how to manage lifestyle changes and how to deal with things with your caregiver, nutritional kinds of things as well. And I think that's great. So that's a great webinar that's done, I think, every Wednesday evening that just started a few months ago.
Great, Dr. White.
I think that if anything during COVID, we have gotten very good with webinars and sort of virtual meetings and
Yeah.
and all of this, and that's beneficial in this regard because a lot of these, like the amyloidosis support group, yes, they can link you to resources in your local area, but as well, you have access to a lot of this online. You know, so you can participate virtually and online as well. So. Yes, I second everything that Dr. Saraswat said, and I just wanted to add that as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. That's helpful too. Now let's talk about something someone asked in the Q&A. It says, are there financial resources available for testing if it's not covered by insurance? I know you talked about genetic counseling. If you're able to offer that, folks could get away with it without insurance. But can you talk a little bit about that? A little bit more about that, just in case they missed it. Both Dr. White and Dr. Saraswat, any one of you can go.
I'll let you take that, Dr. Saraswat. I know you mentioned the genetic testing a little bit earlier.
Yeah, no, I think I guess I'm trying to figure out what else to add, right? Like, so
Even if it's just reiterating the points, because I'm just making
sure.
sure that if they missed it, that they hear it again.
Yeah, so often the pharmaceutical companies, of course, sponsor genetic testing through things like Invitae or Ambry. These are genetic testing companies. And so even if you were to go to their website, you can see kind of the process of how you do it, or your provider can do this, where they get online and go to the Invitae website and look at, so like Alnylam, who makes a couple of the medications, sponsors things through Invitae. Just put in the information, say I have a family member that has this, and again, it just sends you a kit in the mail. One of the other companies uses Ambry. There's, you know, these different ways of kind of going about it. The challenge with some of the genetic testing through counselors, which I think is the right way to go, is that often people's licenses don't cover things across states. So for instance, like if I have a patient who has 10 children, right? The ones that are certainly in Illinois are much easier to test. I can come to clinic with them and I can organize all of their testing even if they're not my patient. Whereas if they live in a different state, often what I'll do is even connect them with an amyloid specialist that's in their state. And the amyloid world is very small. We all know each other quite well. So you have a son who's in Colorado, I'll pick up the phone or send an email to my buddy in Colorado and say, hey, this is a child of one of my patients. Could they come see you, and can you help them get testing? Obviously that, again, is sometimes can be an insurance issue, but then they can even do things through the pharmaceutical companies and through the genetic testing companies in that way.
Okay.
And
Great.
this isn't related to testing, but from a financial access standpoint, the medications, as I discussed earlier, a lot of the medications that we use, there are patient assistance programs if somebody is not able to financially afford the medications. And so we do the applications for patients, and if they qualify based on their income, then we're usually able to get them the medications that way as well. So yes, there are financial barriers, but there are additional things that we can do to kind of help address some of those financial barriers.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
agreed.
They still,
oh, go ahead.
the financial barriers still do exist. And sometimes patients will give up. And so, unless and a lot of it depends on, because you hear different things. Some centers, I'm sure, are more aggressive at getting the help for patients than others. And some of them kind of fall through the wayside. I do know for a fact that if you get the testing is, the amyloid, they will do the testing. But if you get a positive test and you don't have insurance, it is still very difficult to find a center that follows you, because someone's got, because people, even a advanced cardiac center is usually within a larger system that really has a lot to say in terms of what we're going to do for free. And they will not usually do those echocardiograms and things that you need to do for follow-up. So we still need some advocacy as far as that's concerned, so it's not so frustrating. Because it would be different, probably wherever you go. Maybe, in Chicago, that's fine if they've got a system. But a lot of places, and I live in an area that there are a lot of advanced centers, but the barriers are there. So it's real. And then people, which is why I was so excited about a lot of the things we talked about today in terms of the clinical trials, because that seems like that would be an avenue for some folk, who don't have
Insurance.
the insurance. And I know because we're the Affordable Care Act, not everyone, the Affordable Care is usually not free. It's very difficult, say, in my state, to qualify for Medicaid. So if you don't have, especially if you're a single person, and we're talking about single folk with no children, it is very hard to do that. And so it's a challenge, and we might as well keep that real because it is.
Absolutely. It's a challenge, and that's why we're doing the education and continuing the
Yes,
advocacy.
yes,
So that hopefully folks know about the support groups that they can look for locally
yes,
and begin to figure out ways to address it. Because honestly, like you say, there's no one size fits all for everybody
that's right.
as an
That's right.
answer. So thank you very much. This has been really helpful. And I just want to take this time out to shout out, I think her name is Kristen Sue. I hope I'm saying it correctly, the Executive Director of Research at ARC. Thank you for joining our webinar today, and we will be connecting hopefully after this. Yeah, you all have said a lot of things. One word, one final word. What would you like our folks to go away from this webinar with? We talked about the fact that this is supposed to be education, empowerment to advocate for both treatment, clinical research, letting others be aware of this. So what's one thing you want everybody to take away from this webinar? I'll start with you, Dr. White.
Be educated. There is hope.
I love it. Thank you. Dr. Saraswat.
Mine's a wordier version of hers, but I would say the same thing. Learn to recognize the signs and symptoms in yourself and in your family members so you can advocate for yourselves, and then, realize that we have good treatments for this. This is not a hopeless disease. We have a lot of good things coming down the pipeline as well to reverse this, and there's good hope.
There's
Absolutely.
good hope. Thank you. Ms. Velma.
Well, I like that they both said hope.
Yeah.
That's great. But I would say persistence, because you have to be able to navigate this complex system that we have called healthcare. So persist, advocate, advocate.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And if you have any concerns, you feel like there's something you're still missing, please feel free to reach out to us at shc@nmqf.org. Again, that's shc@nmqf.org. We will be able to connect you with our amazing panelists, who can maybe help you get connected with some of these groups they've talked about so well, or even the clinical research. We hope that you feel empowered, we feel educated, and like they all have said, there is hope. But like Ms. Velma said, be persistent. Don't give up. Don't give up. Thank you again so much, everyone, for joining our call today. We hope that you have a wonderful rest of the day and a wonderful weekend. And with this, we want to say thank you for joining our webinar. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.